All right. So here we go. I'm going to share this. And Aiko and Shigeko will notice some familiarity here. So, all right, here, off and running. So Aiko and Shigeko, of course, were in Wyoming, and I'm starting here. This was all the people who attended that were born in Heart Mountain. Now, to be born, you have to have a mother and father, and so Aiko's and Shigeko's mother and father were the first couple to be married at Heart Mountain. And you can see Aiko's mother in a traditional gown, and then not so traditional.
All borrowed. All borrowed.
All borrowed. And this is the whole clan, the wedding picture. Did you want, Shigeko, Aiko, did you want to say anything about this picture?
Not really. That's
Okay.
Grandma. Next, my mother's left is my father's mother.
Okay, father's mother. Who's that?
It was cold there, very cold.
Apparently, this is the only picture we have of Aiko at the camp. Okay, on to China. So today on Drum Tower, the Economist podcast, they went over what we've been covering. Bob Oxenborough alerted us to this change in agriculture policy. And no, it was, I'm sorry, Bob Kelso. And then Bob Oxenborough said, wait a second. We went through that. But it turns out that there is something going on with their agriculture policy. And Xi Jinping has really been pushing for food security. The netizens in China have some freedom and some influence. And so they can report destruction of crops and put it on, and people react, and Xi Jinping has to respond. And he's doubled down. He's gone to Sichuan province twice as part of his campaign for food security. His slogans are plastered all over. We talked a little bit about that last week. Australia is reacting, as is other places. And then just shifting gears to Fareed Zakaria and how he perceives what's going on in China. Y'all know, I listen to him weekly, and his analysis is really good, and it's always published. His take is always published in the Washington Post. But he says that we've survived the China shock, and that China's still reeling, and unemployment's still a big problem at a job market in Beijing. And then deflation. That means nobody's buying anything. It's a very simple definition. So the confidence in the economy among the Chinese is down. They're not buying new homes. Youth unemployment is still at 20%. Tourism in China has collapsed. And Fareed Zakaria pointed to an article in Foreign Affairs and made these points that the Communist Party is putting the party above free markets. And what is its cost is the confidence of the Chinese people that they stopped buying and started saving for a rainy day. And so it was in the face of uncertainty and fear that they did that. And Zakaria makes the point, hey, we've seen this in Venezuela, we've seen it in Russia, Turkey, and Hungary, that as leadership consolidates power, it attacks whatever companies they see in the private sector as being problematic. And basically, once the government starts dabbling in the economy, confidence is lost. And it's difficult to win that confidence back again because the fourth wall has been breached, and people know you could do it again. Shifting gears to this country, there's some downbeat news. This Air Force general is predicting a war with China within a couple of years. And unfortunately, this can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? This kind of downward spiral race to the bottom. Yes, Aiko.
You're muted.
I can't hear you.
Sorry. I read this thing, you know, because of the unemployment rate being 20% among the young people, China has come out and said to especially college graduates, take any job. Don't sit there and wait for, you know, anything, just work.
Yeah, that's right. And some parents have taken to hiring their children. Anyway, self-fulfilling prophecy, kind of a race to the bottom. He hopes he's wrong, and I hope he's wrong. So Biden has been reaching out and see if he can disrupt this downward spiral. So he sent off all these people to China. Count them, there's 5 of them. Most recently, interestingly enough, I think Aiko's a big fan of Gina Raimondo. Aiko has been touting her as for president. But she went even though she'd been hacked. So Biden said, it doesn't matter if China's hacked you, you're still going. So off she went. What's been pointed out is there's an ominous trifecta of hacking of US officials like Raimondo, but also the bribing of US servicemen. And when you read the story, you look very hard for the name, and they're Chinese names, right? So these are Chinese Americans that have been reached by the Chinese party. And then the final thing that's a little bit nerve-wracking is Chinese vessels have been doing drills with Russian ships off the coast of Alaska, getting shockingly close, provocative, and has resulted in our escorting the Chinese and the Russian ships away from our coast. So, I mean, I guess that went okay, but you can imagine a scenario where that may not go okay. So, naval segue on shamelessly to Ukraine. This is a picture taken from a Ukrainian drone, and it's approaching a large ship in the port of Novorossiysk, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is important. Where is Novorossiysk? It's in Russia. It's down here. And this is, they saw the ship being towed into the Nosirek harbor. But this is important because across the Black Sea, this indicates the communication trade across the Black Sea. But let me talk about the pipeline, which is also comes into Novorossiysk. And where is that coming from? Kazakhstan. So this is going to affect the Russian shipment of oil. So if you hear that Ukraine is having some success with interrupting the flow of Russian oil, these maps explain it. And this is what David Pepper and I like to do, is see things on maps. This is a more detailed map of that. Here is where it comes in. You see the Russian coastline goes all the way down to Georgia, and Sochi is where Putin has his castle, right? And that's where the Winter Olympics were, right down here. So Ukraine has let it be known that it considers all the ports along here fair targets in the current situation to keep neutral ships from going in. So my thinking is I've been getting a little depressed at the lack of progress on land, and maybe we've been focused too much on land. There's other stuff going on, and we've talked specifically about two bridges: the Kerch Bridge, and then there's another bridge coming up in Kherson province that has been targeted and could affect very much the supply of the Russian military in Crimea. Now, just shifting to the other side of the Black Sea, again, the maps are going to be important here. Odessa is a city, but it's also a state. It's a region. And there's a city there called Ismail. And where is that city? Again, we go to the maps. Ismail is here on the Danube. And this was always something that really impressed me, that the Danube comes into the Black Sea here, and it's always been important in Ukraine. The Vikings, when they came down and settled Kiev, they continued with their longboats, and they went down. They went eventually all the way to Constantinople, but they quite often would turn right and go up on raids in the Danube River. And you follow that river on up, and you get into Austria, you get into Germany, Regensburg. Eiko and I have been along here. The city where Hitler was born is on the Danube in Austria. So the Danube is an important river, and when now it resurfaces because it's the boundary between a NATO country, Romania, and Ukraine. And so all it's going to take is a little error in a drone to bomb Romania, and then all bets are off. So Ismail, and important because the Russians, especially now, are blockading the Black Sea and the different outlets. So they're being forced to resort to land routes. And so here they're unloading the grain in Ismail, and it goes across the Danube to Romania to be trucked out. And here with the interruption are all these trucks that were meant to get grain that now there's limited grain, and they're backed up for miles on the Romanian side. All right, so I'll take a deep breath and just see if anybody has any comments before I turn to Timothy Snyder. Okay, on we go. Question. I want to credit Bob Oxenberg for getting this from the Financial Times. where it appeared. None of us have a subscription, and for good reason. It costs like $50 a month. Anyway, he submitted to a deep interview recently with the Financial Times. And there's some stuff, since we've been following him so closely, and he certainly influenced my thinking. How is he responding to this slowdown in the advance? I think we were all hoping for something like we saw last September, just sudden advance and retreat. And that still could happen. It still could happen. And just bear in mind, all Ukraine has to do is break that land bridge in 1 point, And if they do, they cut off the Russian supply lines. Whereas the Russians have to defend that whole land bridge. So time may be on our side. I'm full of wishful thoughts. I always am, but that's my wishful thought of the hour. So Snyder goes into detail. They encountered him when he had just found out about the death of one of his friends, an authoress from Ukraine. And she was targeted in a restaurant habituated by intellectuals and foreign journalists. Very calculating target. And he talks about our misreading of Russia. Obama certainly did. He thinks maybe he did. He wrote this book on tyranny, and he thinks that he should have been even stronger in the way he presented the problems of Ukraine and Russia. And he's afraid that he's feeling a little guilty that he hasn't been able to convince Americans 100%. And that he says we're still thinking of Putin as a relatable politician, power politician, and he doesn't think so anymore. He puts Putin in his own category. And Putin has created this kleptocracy that has stolen all the money, and all they have left to do is some kind of performance in foreign policy, which this is my thought. It's like the Romans and the circuses. So he does find some hope. He found Prigozhin reassuring, and that Prigozhin was perfectly willing to state publicly that he understands what's laying behind the problem in Ukraine. And he's optimistic that the Russians will eventually figure it out. It's taken an awfully long time. He threw in this interesting comment about social media that I just add parenthetically, that the sirens in Ulysses are so irresistible because they find songs that address each sailor individually. And he says that's very much like the algorithmic superpower. I like that phrase that our social media has now. He ends with this kind of philosophical thought that history is a bit like math. The deeper you get, the weirder it becomes, but also more beautiful. I thought that was an interesting paradox. So this question comes up. I think I've mentioned it with Carol. The ultimate question is, will the Russians tolerate the thing that Putin did in Chechnya, which is basically destroy it to save it, right? Kind of what we did in parts of Vietnam. So this is Grozny. And that was 1999, and solving the Chechen problem is what finally convinced the Russians and Yeltsin that this was a guy who could pull Russia out of its a bad place. So this brings up the point of empire and the tragic mind. This is the most recent book by Robert Kaplan. Ramsey introduced us to this guy about 8 years ago. And the tragic mind makes you realize, and I've listened to a couple of his podcast interviews, basically you can't always get what you want. The world is such that you have to accept the inevitable tragedy of life. And of course, we all know we have to do that on our personal lives, but he makes the point. And he's even been quite provocative in saying that sometimes empires work out. And of course, the realists, Count Kissinger among them, say that you have to recognize spheres of influence. And spheres of influence created 100 years of peace in Europe. So it's not chopped liver. So I've approached Ramsey. He has looked at it and he said, well, John, there's good empires and there's bad empires. And he kind of, in a long email, laid out a nice outline. And so I'm going to prevail upon him. He leaves for the Silk Road next week. So it's not going to be for a while, but we'll see. All right, on to Oppenheimer. I go and I saw it, and it's wonderful. And I'd like to talk about it more, but it's pointless to talk about it until you've seen it. The only thing I'll say is you might prepare yourself. If the best preparation is to read the book, American Prometheus. But that failing, you could at least pull up the cast. And it's easy to do. Just Google Oppenheimer cast. And you might just take a look at the 59 characters, the 49 characters that are represented there. And I'd say the ones that jump out at me are Robert Downey Jr. Oh my goodness, what a part he plays. This guy, Cillian Murphy, he's an Irish actor, and we've been watching him in, what's it called, Iko? Pinky Bottoms or something?
Pinky, I forget.
It's about post-World War I and the
Pinky Blinders.
Pinky Blinders, thank you. Not Pinky Bottoms. It takes a village. Thank you, Homer. So he's good. It's left to this guy to have the best, most inspirational speech at the very end. He's a minor character until the last 5 minutes. Josh Hartnett plays Lawrence, our own Lawrence Labs in Berkeley and Livermore. A very good job. Albert Einstein is played by Tom Conti. Matt Damon plays Leslie Groves, just a fabulous job. Heisenberg, important, but look at this. Gary Oldman plays Harry Truman. Go figure. So, and Kenneth Branagh plays the idealist senior statesman throughout the movie, Niels Bohr, who is much older than Oppenheimer. But he advocates for openness and dealing with the Soviets in this new age, so nobody starts competing for nuclear weapons. That didn't quite work because of people like Edward Teller, played by this guy. I'm just trying to get across my enthusiasm for the movie. If you can at least look at this before you go in and try to keep the different people straight as you go along. You don't need to. You don't need to keep them straight, but parts of it will flow. And the best thing would be to read the book. And what helped for me, because I read the book over the last 6 months, was just to go back and do a search of the time, every time the word Einstein appeared. And you could just go through real quick and read, it turns out for Einstein, 50 paragraphs that gives you a sense of the through line of this 900-page book. Anyway, that's just me. I'm going to shamelessly use Oppenheimer as a segue back to San Francisco Bay. Put on your seatbelt. Oppenheimer here is with Lawrence. As early as 1931, they had bonded by then, and Oppenheimer took Lawrence out to New Mexico, where his father had loved him and taken him as a kid. And the reason that's important, of course, is that's where the Manhattan Project eventually goes, Los Alamos. And the tension between them is really interesting. It turns out Lawrence is pretty conservative. And even in Berkeley, Oppenheimer gets involved in a labor union that is organizing lab workers at the Lawrence lab. That just kind of, he's a lefty and his socialist tendencies, and he and Lawrence fight over that, and that does lead to some tension in their relationship, particularly when you move into the 50s. And the 50s is the third hour of this 3-hour movie. And pretty darn interesting the way that Christopher Nolan frames it. It's kind of a recap. They're not trials, but they're hearings that are testing Oppenheimer's loyalty and his security clearance. And it's a mechanism to just review what his work was and what the philosophy was about it. All right, so here's the shameless segue back to San Francisco. So Oppenheimer and Lawrence were in San Francisco, and Cabrillo didn't reach San Francisco. He reached Point Reyes. Aiko, are you keeping time for me?
Oh, it's 10 minutes to 3.
I'll go to 15 after. Is that okay? Given my late start. If anybody has any problems, let me know, and we can abbreviate the session. My bad. I apologize again. So he called Point Reyes Cabo de Pinos. He was really impressed by the pine trees, and he even went further. He went up to the Russian River. But the storms up there battered his ships. And this is a recurring problem with the Spanish exploration along the northern California coast. The ships were constantly being damaged or caught in currents. This has been so chronic that there's a long history of shipwrecks at Point Reyes. This is from the National Park file. Cabrillo missed the bay twice, once going up and coming back down from the Russian River, as would everyone else for 220 years. It was never found by a vision from the sea. And the question is why? Well, we're all familiar with the fog and Angel Island, but I'd like to throw out another possibility, and that is the unique shape of the Sacramento River Delta. It's an inverted triangle. And it says a rare kind of delta. I couldn't find another example of it. I searched and searched. If anybody can find another inverted triangle anywhere, let me know. They mentioned Vietnam, but I looked at the maps. It doesn't look like an inverted triangle. But ours is an inverted triangle, and the Carquinez Strait plays a key point here.
And in the formation of that, isn't that thought because of the inland sea that actually the triangle was like where it broke through the wall of the mountain range there, the low point?
Yeah, the coastal range. But why is there a coastal range? Let me go ahead, David. I think I'm going to answer your thought. So here's the usual delta. Delta is Greek for triangle, right? So that's what a delta is, but we've got an inverted delta. And why is it inverted? So there's all these forces that come together, geological forces. And the problem is where the Carquinez Strait was, that used to be a delta of sorts, the outlet of a delta. Where our delta is now was at one point an opening to the ocean, right? But what's happened is subduction and the constant creation of a coastal range, which means that the natural delta over here never reaches the sea as soon as that coastal range goes up. And the Carquinez Strait, as David points out, is a break in that coastal range. Notice that the Pacific plate pushed the Farallon plate underneath. Part of the Farallon plate to the northwest broke off and is now the Juan de Fuca plate that's so active and is causing explosions like Mount St. Helena. That's part of the old Farallon plate, but down here, the Pacific plate has completely pushed it under, scraped off its seabed to create the coastal range, which is why behind our house, I've taken Homer up to Shell Ridge, David too. That's why we have shells at the top of ridges. So you got that as a variable. And then you also got the sideways motion of the Pacific plate on the continental plate, creating the San Andreas fault, and all these minor faults that just come in and affect the course of water as it tries to make its natural way back to the sea. Now, add to that the sea level was very low here once, and basically this Sacramento and San Joaquin River was at the bottom of the bay, A drowned river valley is what happened with the global warming of the last 18,000 years as sea level rose. And this is the result. This is the Rand McNally geographic map. And this is that animation that I love so much. This is when the bathtub was empty. This is the Sacramento River coming through here. And I guess here this would have formed a delta of some sort, but already because of subduction, there was a coastal range here. So I'm going to push the magic button here and we'll watch the bathtub fill. Water breaks through into what's now the bay, creates what's now the bay, Carquinez, and then it goes up higher and comes back down. So I love that animation. And then so the river met the sea at the Farallon Islands 18,000 years ago. And then you could see how key the Carquinez Strait was eventually, and the unique configuration of all these forces creates a treacherous current at max tidal volume. The flow of water through the Golden Gate is equal to the Amazon, the flow. Here is some numbers just to verify that, kind of meaningless. But this is interesting. The water depth at the Golden Gate is 300 feet, but the average depth of the bay is just 14. So you get some interesting phenomenon with this. So I'll just skip over that. We won't do that again.
John, you know what's interesting is the deep water channel, which is where all the boats go up to the Stockton River, is quite a bit more than 14 feet. But
yeah, it's the average depth.
Right, but I mean that river still persists down below, and they don't have to dredge most of it until they get up to I think they start dredging around Martinez. But that channel is still existent. If you look at the whatever NOAA or whoever does the depths of water, you can still see the old river bottom.
Ah, interesting. Thank you, David.
So,
I thought we'd look ahead to the future with sea levels rising. And things have kind of been accelerated most recently. The sea level rise, what's it going to do in the future? It's going to affect Sassoon Bay and Grizzly Bay. You'll see that on the map in just a second. And these, even a small amount is going to affect the bay a lot. So 4 feet of sea level rise projected in the future would very much affect Redwood City, San Carlos, Belmont. There's a new study that says, look, you can look at the average over time, but what you're really interested in is the episodic peak problems where you get a summation of this gradual filling of the bathtub with tides, storms, and erosion. And you add those up to a peak episode, and it can have really short-term impacts beyond the projections. So the projections here, the blue is a rise of 3.3 feet within the next 25 years. And you can see that there's considerable effect from sea level rise. But it's not just sea level rise. There are other factors. It's more complicated. But and that's regardless of what we do in the way of reducing future emissions. It could be as bad as 10 feet. And this urbanist is saying we really should be preparing between 4 and 10 feet.
A comment, John, on our state of preparation. The San Francisco Chronicle listed 3 zip codes that have the fastest growing real estate in the Bay Area. One of them is Foster City. That's where, I mean, people are.
The other is something like 60% of the world's airports are within 5 feet of the water.
Yep.
Just think about it. Where are you going to land a plane? Right in, flat over the water, where it's perfectly.
Low tide.
Well, let me show you a map of the San Francisco airport in just a second. So this is Treasure Island's at risk. This is a mobile home park in Pacific, I think. And it's not just the global warming and sea level rise. There's also, because we're on the earthquake faults, let's bring that variable in. So plus you get subsidence sinking, and they're looking at and rating the shoreline all along California, whether it's likely to rise or sink.
So, hey, John, I got to interfere, but your map doesn't go with your writing. It says on the map, blue areas are subsidence and red areas are uplift. And that's the exact opposite of what you've written.
No.
Right? Blue are subsidence. You have red as subsidence up in the top.
No, I think it's the other way.
Well, but I'm just looking at the right there. Blue areas show land subsidence.
So,
And I think that's right, because I think
that's interesting. Thank you for picking that up, David.
I'm just going.
Yeah, it says red areas show land uplift at the very bottom.
Yeah, well, I guess
Los Angeles.
I guess that that makes a difference, doesn't it?
It does. I think you got it, because that means blue is not uplift. It's actually the whole Bay Area is at risk of sinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that correction.
Major point there. Yeah.
Where's Walnut Creek?
It doesn't matter. Walnut Creek's high enough.
Really?
No, yeah. The issue is that at 10 feet, you take out something like 60 or 70% of the airports in the world. So it doesn't matter if you're 15 feet by the time you hit 10. And then you add the king tides in the winter when we're closest to the moon is closest to us. And there's major problems coming. We've been,
we're gonna have to be like Barra, where they land in the airport during low tide.
Yeah. Well, you can see I've got a close-up map here in just a second. San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego sinking, made worse by groundwater and gas and oil production.
Yeah, so you've got the right areas. You just that red blue at the very first line that you.
Yeah. Sorry for that. So Southern California, there's some uplift around Santa Ana. I guess they've been doing some work on the aquifer, and then parts of LA are in uplift. Here we go. This is some parts of the Bay Area are uplift. So it looks like Mount Diablo. But as you point out, a lot of blue. And then Treasure Island is subsidence. And somehow Livermore Valley is lifting up, probably because the underground aquifer there is refilling. I don't know why. So All right, so there's that. And so I think one reason for the high level of shipwrecks, and some people have called it our Bermuda Triangle, has to do with the currents and the unique features of this inverted delta triangle. The National Park Service has a whole brochure on this. All right, so back to Cabrillo. He headed back south. He found Monterey, which he called Bahia de los Pinos. When he passed there, by the time he got there, I think it was the end of November, and he could see the snow on the Sierras. And that's when the Sierra Nevada got their name. It was from Cabrillo, snowy mountains. They hid out in Monterey as the storms passed, but their ships had been damaged. So they went back to the Channel Islands to repair their ships. And one thing led to another. It was over fresh water. Again, as they had in San Diego, they went to a water source without permission, and that's a no-no in the Native American culture. And they were attacked, and some of his men were captured, and Cabrillo led a small party. This is, unfortunately for Cabrillo, the worst thing, incidents of violence between he and the natives. So far, he had resisted, and even in San Diego, when some of his men had been injured by arrows, he had instructions to not fight back. But in this case, he did, and he himself participated and managed to break his tibia, getting in and out of the boat. And he died because that's what happened when you had an infection. So, fortunately, things are better now, and we have hospitals that we can go to and recuperate. The question is, where did he die? And I put a slash because there's some controversy. Was it San Miguel Island or was it Catalina, where Homer's ancestors hung out? But in any case, he died. And at first, the Portuguese sponsored a headstone for him on San Miguel Island. But then more research was done. He was called the Portuguese explorer at that time because they thought that's where he was born. And then he went to Spain when he was a teenager. But more research was done, and he was later called a likely Spaniard, and he probably died on Santa Catalina. Nevertheless, the headstone is still on San Miguel. And where he's buried, he was likely buried at sea, so that nobody was right. And that is the story of Cabrillo.
10 minutes after.
Huh?
10 minutes after.
Okay. Let me put a few final touches on and to take us to around 3:15. First of all, he wasn't the first to discover anything, right? Even in San Miguel, there were 100 Chumash living in 2 villages, and they'd been there for 12,000 years. As he was dying, he told his crew, listen, why don't you head back up north and let's see, we've kind of failed so far, but let's see if you can find a good harbor where ships can come in. Monterey was deemed to not be that good because they'd been caught in a storm there. But they had scurvy and beriberi, apparently, which is also what Aiko, the grandmother that was sitting next to your mother, was that the grandmother that got beriberi?
That was my dad's.
Oh, that was the other grandmother. Okay. Because from milled rice, right? That was when the Japanese started milling their rice, that was a risk. They didn't know about beriberi quite.
Down here, your tray?
What?
No, it's commissioners.
Nothing, John, just hospital routine.
Okay. Failure. He didn't find the waterways. He didn't discover the Northwest Passage. He didn't even, they thought that maybe the Colorado River had another opening to the sea. He missed the Golden Gate, so failure on waterways. He didn't find a mineral wealth. But the question, what if he had gotten into the San Francisco Bay? It would have just been a matter of time for them to work their way up through the Carquinez Straits and up to around Sutter's Mill. So what if? They didn't find any stuff worth buying. The Chinese had that market cornered. The Chumash weren't producing that much. And here were the long shots. He never found Queen Calafia. He never increased his fortune. In fact, he died, but if he had survived, he would have been poorer, having lost a lot of his ships and stuff. He didn't, at least they were going to see if there was some connection to Asia. And of course there was, but that they were way short of the Bering Strait. And they didn't find a resupply harbor, and he missed the shellfish Garden of Eden of San Francisco Bay, where which we all love. So was he an explorer, a discoverer, or was he a conquistador? Well, his previous behavior, he was a brutal slave owner. There's no question about it. In Guatemala. He was okay on this voyage until the very end. Nevertheless, we honor him with stamps and we name our highways after him. I think we name some of our high schools and some of the, I don't know if their nicknames are still the conquistadors. But anyway, native Californians surely saw them. And there are stories that are handed down from the natives that spotted these boats going up and down. And when we resume, we're going to look at some of the microscopic invaders that would eventually affect California, the plants, the diseases, including venereal disease, and look at the consequences. Even this early, there were consequences. And you'll remember the conquest of Montezuma, the smallpox killed off 90% of Tenochtitlan because it was an urban place and it spread like wildfire. It certainly worked its way up the coast, as did measles, but it never was an epidemic like it had been in Tenochtitlan with its dense population. So that's where we'll resume next time. Comments, thoughts?
Well,
Shigeko.
Yeah, this is backtracking, but the LA Times has had a really good Oppenheimer makes it historical blunders. The movie is mostly right about the man's Manhattan Project role, but has some errors, and it's A8 in the business section yesterday in the LA Times.
Oh, okay.
It's really interesting. And I guess Lawrence was, he was a top choice of General Groves, but he felt he was too important to just be sidelined in the Manhattan Project.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah, because I guess Lawrence was, it says right here, he was arguably the most first homegrown scientific celebrity in American history.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And he's quite a persona in the movie. One reviewer said he almost stole the show.
Oh,
He's quite dashing. And what did you think, Aiko?
Yeah, I mean, the actor was very, very nice looking, but I thought I had heard that Lawrence was not nice looking, though. He was a big man.
Yeah. Well, we saw that photograph with him in Oppenheimer in 1931 out in New Mexico. Yeah.
yeah, but this is really worth a read in the LA Times.
Okay, we'll look
Oh,
for it.
what page? Do you have it in front of you?
Well,
Yes, A8.
yeah, but
Business.
the electronic and the,
Oh.
she gets the regular paper. So I'll look for, what's the title so I can look for it?
Oppenheimer makes historical blunders.
Okay, Oppenheimer makes historical blunders.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I'll look.
Okay. All right.
you.
Well, we started this with the Otis sisters posing in Wyoming, and we ended with the Otis sisters ogling Ernest Lawrence. So there you go. They captured our whole podcast.
He was handsome.
Okay, thanks. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I know exactly what went wrong in retrospect, but
no worries. No worries. All good. Homer, I hope you recover well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care, Homer.
yeah,
Yes,
you're amazing, Homer. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.